Thank you for joining this webinar. We're going to wait a couple more seconds to give people the opportunity to join. So if you just sit tight with us, we'll begin shortly. If you are just joining the webinar, we are going to give a couple more seconds to give everyone the opportunity to join, and just bear with us while we wait, and then we'll get started. Okay, I'm not seeing any new attendees joining in, so we'll go ahead and get started with this meeting. My name is Tiffany Martinez. I'm the Communications Officer here at the Community Development and Infrastructure Department. I will be moderating this meeting. Prior to starting the presentation, I wanted to go ahead and begin with a session statement for you all. So this meeting will be recorded for transparency and accessibility for those unable to attend this meeting. By participating, you consent to being recorded. This meeting recording will be posted on our website. And by our website, I mean our YouTube channel, which I will also link in the chat. That way you can have access to that. Santa Cruz County respects citizens' free speech rights and has developed community meeting conduct standards to respect all meeting participants. Under these conduct standards, meeting organizers can remove disruptive individuals in person or online, well, in this case online, who engage in behavior that is slanderous, profane, threatening, or who exhibit other disorderly conduct that disrupts the meeting. Moving on to the Q&A process, we plan to address all questions at the end of the presentation. We will address questions in the order that they are received. Please use the hand raising feature, which you can actually find at the bottom of your screen, or feel free to use the Q&A function that you'll also find at the bottom of your screen when you are seeking recognition to speak and ask a question. This will help facilitate a smoother flow of communication throughout the meeting and ensure everyone has an opportunity to speak. Moving on to the power outage protocol. In the unlikely event of a power outage, we will stop the meeting for 15 minutes to wait for power restoration. If you find yourself disconnected, please attempt to reconnect. If you are unable to reconnect successfully, attempt to reconnect again in 15 minutes. If the power outage persists beyond 15 minutes, we will have to reschedule the current meeting and will notify all residents via mail. We appreciate your cooperation and look forward to a productive meeting. With that, I will be handing the presentation portion of this community meeting over to Beatriz Barranco.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany, for that. I also wanted to, I'm Beatriz Barranco. I'm the Senior Civil Engineer in charge of sanitation operations for the County of Santa Cruz. And I just wanted to let you know that Carolyn Burke, our Assistant Director of Special Services, is also available here and present. So I wanted to talk to you about the CSA number 2, Security Services, and just delve into this. Will be our agenda. I'll give you a brief overview for some new homeowners or property owners. Just explain to you what the CSA number 2 services include, and then really focus on our security services, and then discuss the budget, and then if there's any we will be moving into the next steps on how we would be increasing the rates for folks out there. So CSA 2 was established in 1963, and the services include the maintenance of the beach access, maintenance of roads, and this component, what we call security services or patrol services, and then the sewer services. So you have a collection system and an enhanced treatment system. And I was involved in those enhancements back in 2020 during COVID. And so I'm very familiar with how much you're paying towards those improvements. But CDI, our name has changed. We're part of CDI, Community Development and Infrastructure. And so sanitation operations maintains and operates the community's septic system and the sewer collection system. And roads focuses on the beach access and roads as well. And security services was managed previously by our administrative staff downtown. And so since we've incurred these outstanding charges that I want to mention, we're going to be taking control of that component. But I want to say that the security patrol services included vehicle patrol of Ocean View Drive, Hillview Way, Holiday Drive, and also walking down to the beach access road. And that was 3 times per day. So 11 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock, and then at 10 o'clock at night. And so this patrol officers would let the, any beach folks, they would notify them that the beach was closed at 10 o'clock. And I know that in prior years, there's been a lot of vandalism of vehicles along that, just right, I'm toggling with my arrow, but that's where there's parking there, and our enhanced treatment system is right across the road from there. So they would, offer, part of their services included writing up citations as well. So they would let them know that the beach was closed, and if they needed to call the sheriffs, they would, step it up on the services. So over the past 10 years, approximately, we have always budgeted money set aside for patrol services. So in prior years, the services were about $7,800 to $9,100 annually. And the past 4 years, we had a contract with Universal Protection, and that contract was up, and when I say we, it's the county, decided that we would do a master independent contract agreement and collectively work with other county departments. And that included parks and general services that oversees all county facilities. And we thought that we would get a better price. And I think initially, like I mentioned, I was not involved in this selection of the contractor or service provider, but the contract was awarded to National Security Industries. And that contract started in July of last year, July 1st. And it went through the end of this fiscal year. So our contracts are set up for fiscal years. And when we were made aware of how much their invoices had incurred, I show this $31,172.80 in cost for security services. So we were made aware of this around February of this year. And we, unfortunately, we were short on staff, and we were dealing with emergencies. And when we were able to regroup, we called a meeting with the owner of the company in early May, and we suspended those services for May and June. So $31,172 covers approximately 11 months of the fiscal year. So on average, they were charging about $3,000 per month for those security services. And so now we're up against, that I'll share with you your budget, but I just want to give you, again, another overview of how many condos and homes and townhomes are in the entire CSA. So there's approximately 93. So when we look at overall how much each parcel is contributing towards the security services, it's about $118, but we budget about $11,000 annually to pay for these type of services. But unfortunately, National Security Services incurred $32,000 in fees. And each year I'm responsible for developing this budget for your CSA. And it's something that is reviewed by all of our staff, the assistant directors, fiscal staff. And I just want to show you and explain to you how in 23 and 24, that's last fiscal year, we had an adopted budget, and we have all of the revenue that's coming in. And those are the sewer service charges that everyone pays. And we had about $114,000 come in, and we break it up into park maintenance. We're required to notify each resident homeowner of our proposed rate increases. And so we had $800 set aside, and there's road maintenance, stairway maintenance, litter pickup, and then the pump station, electrical maintenance and operations, the sewer maintenance, and permit fees. And then here I've highlighted in green this security services, which we had set aside $9,000. And then we have pump motor repair and replacement, utility costs, and some money set aside for engineering time. So that would be my time, or we have on staff a senior engineering associate as well. So, and then there's a little bit of accounting audit fees. And so that totals $129,800, which is more than what's coming in. But your CSA has some reserve money. And so we've been having to go into those reserves to make sure that we have enough for our expenditures. So, but if you look at our actual costs, we didn't use up all of the money that we were proposing to use. So there's a little somewhat of a balance in there. And so our expenditure totals were $125,000 and 54 cents. So we had an ending balance, an ending fund balance for the CSA, and that moves over into our beginning fund balance for this current fiscal year. And so for revenue charges, we have about 116,592 coming in. And again, we developed this budget based on what we're using in prior years, what we're expending. And then if we see any cost increases, for example, I've increased M&O for sewer up to $102,000. And then knowing that there was a little bit more in security services, I had increased it to 11,980. So we developed, and we have our expenditure subtotals of 136,780. But given that we have that outstanding balance with National Security Services, we show this down here, and I highlight it in green, that we have to pay that balance for all of those services that they provided. So it decreases our capital reserves as well. So that's gone down to 13,165. And so it leaves us with, less money in our reserves. But one thing to highlight is that we were looking at continuing to provide the community with security services for this fiscal year using that 11,980. So right now, we call this meeting because I don't know if folks are aware of that there are no security services being provided. I have not received any phone calls from folks in the community. But I think we really would like to see your capital replacement reserves increased to something healthy. My experience now, I've been out here for 8 years. With all of our disasters that we have and emergencies, we'd like to keep at least $30,000 in those reserves. And one other thing that I wanted to point out is, you know, we really need to reach out and find out from the community if these security services are something that you would like to continue to be served with. And I haven't heard from folks with complaints of vandalism or theft. Our pump stations in the past, before my time, have been vandalized. So the next steps would be to hear from the community. And then I also put in a slide in here to show you what the next steps would be to raise the service rates above our consumer price index rate, which has been typically in the past during my time has been between 2% to up to 4.9%. And we would come to the community again. I would develop a budget in December of this year, and we would hold another community meeting at the end of December, January, early part of 2025. And then part of that process is to present the proposed rates. And then we would hold a meeting, a board meeting, and present those rates to the board in March. And there would be a public hearing in May. And then the service charges would be presented to the board in June, and that would give us time to provide all of that information to the treasurer tax to be placed on your property tax bills for the upcoming would be the year 25, 26. And those would be in your December and April tax rolls. I know I've gone through it just really quickly, but we can open it up to questions, or if Carolyn, if you'd like to add anything that I may have missed. I know it's a little bit complex going over all those numbers.
Right. Yeah. I thank you, Bea. I think you did a great job. And yeah, I guess, you know, this is our initial, as Bea had mentioned, this is our initial outreach to the community, just to check in and see, let you know about the situation, that we will be coming back to you in December. And, you know, we'd love to hear from you if these services are something that you'd like to reestablish in the future, or if you feel that they're not needed. We'd love to get feedback. Of course, if we are to continue to pursue security services, we would, you know, do another request for proposals to solicit some new proposals from different companies. And we did that informally recently, and we found that we could, you know, find some that were a bit less. But we'll have to go out and do that. That's part of the county public governmental procedures. And so, you know, that would be, we get competitive bids and then go with the lowest one. So yeah, if you have both mine and Beatrice's email addresses, and feel free to reach out or go ahead and ask your questions now.
Thank you, Beatrice and Carolyn. It looks like we do have someone with their hand up. John, You should now have the ability to unmute to ask your question.
There you go. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you, I mean, there's a flood of information there. So what I understood, I think, is that the security services jumped tremendously, like 3 times. And I did a calculation that comes to $28 per visit, about $85 per day that national security was paying. Now, I think you said that you canceled that, or we're no longer doing security, and what we have left now is invoices due to cover services that have already been rendered based upon that contract. Is that right?
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Okay, and then the question is, one of the questions is, are we going to want to reinstate some form of security service? That would be a discussion topic or a question, right?
Correct.
Right.
Okay, and then you had another point, which was building the reserves a bit, okay, which would be a conversation, because to build the reserves the way you are recommending would be, and to cover the invoices, would require you raising the assessment above the 2% or whatever the value is that you're allowed by the way that things work. I don't remember if it's the CPI or if it's 2% per year, but in the past it was about 2% per year. I mean, I know how that works because of the Place de Mer Townhome Association has the same kind of limitation on its homeowner dues.
Yeah, and that's correct. CPI, we usually gets published around January. And so in prior years, it's been between 2% and up to 4.9%. So
right. And then you can elect not to do that on a given year, but it accumulates so that if you forego raising it 1 year, let's say it's 2% per year, if you forego raising it 1 year, you can do it 4% in the following year if circumstances warrant that.
that's correct.
Okay. Now, in terms of the security services, it seems like 3 visits per day will do nothing to stop vandalism. I mean, just by my assessment of, they come down, they'll patrol the street for 10 minutes. The state parks do the beach patrol themselves, so it's kind of like belt and suspenders having the security service monitor the beach, it seems to me. Also, I might point out that I don't know what the current status is on the Homeowners Association, Place de Mer, but there are security services that we contract for, but I think that might only be on holidays when there's a lot of activity down there.
That's good too.
But in any case, so there's 2 points. One is, how do we cover paying off the invoices due? And then how would we want to build the reserves faster than the 2% or whatever allowed would be, right? So I think I got that all straight.
Yeah. That's correct.
Okay. Now, just in terms of the way that, ignoring the invoices due for security services, are we in a cash flow situation where we're able to build the reserves, although at a slower rate, or are we, I mean, what is just the cash flow operating expense kind of perspective are we looking at?
Here, let me jump to that slide and show. So for this fiscal year, we had the beginning fund balance of about 54,000. Revenues coming in are about 116,592. But all of these expenditures, so one thing that with this enhanced treatment system that was installed back in 2020, our treatment plant operators are having to spend more time there to sample. It's not a septic system, and it's something that's required by the state. And so the other thing too, that is that the permits increase. So that was something we're paying about $3,400, and I'm still, trying to hold on. And I had only put, here's the actual cost for permits, $3,400. And so I held it at $3,000, but what we're seeing is that our M&O has increased. Although last year we held it really tight too. So I show 136,780, and that, I mean, goes into our reserves, right? And then with the outstanding invoices that we're having to pay, because we don't have, once, you know, I think we're going to be in 25, 26 where there's no reserves, right? Or very little, and it would be good to, like I said, to have at least $30,000, because CSA 5 had an emergency where they had their stairs damaged by the storms in January of 2023. And the deductible was $3,000. And they had that in their reserves, and FEMA picked up the rest. In this case, we don't even have now. The 30,000 is now the minimum. So the deductible for the insurance has increased. And so that's why I would recommend to have at least $30,000 built up. And I can run the numbers. I just, you know, to show everyone, you know, that would be part of my exercise, you know, for December, January, and be able to come back to the community and present that information.
Thank you, Bea. And thank you, John, for asking your question. I want to make sure that we give the opportunity for everybody to ask their questions. So we'll move on. And John, if you do have any additional questions, feel free to raise your hand again, and then we'll come back to you. So it looks like Dana, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself to ask your question.
Okay, I live on Holiday Drive, and we've seen virtually no security services here. So I don't know how that plays into your finances, but we're really not seeing any of that.
So Holiday Drive here.
Yeah, so that's a lot of money to see going out and not have anything coming back.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. Number two is we would like to see a more visible accounting, like a website that we can go to see where the money's going, because we have no idea. We know we get a giant tax bill every year. We pay our taxes every year, but we don't know where the money's going. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to be able to see that. So if you could give us a website that we could go to where we could see an accounting for that money, that would be very helpful.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, I don't know if you can do anything about this, but fireworks are out of control every year down here. It doesn't matter how much the sheriff and the local municipalities are involved, but they're just out of control. We have animals. Our animals just go nuts every year. They go into a closet and shake for 4 hours, and it'd be nice to do something about that.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are my three things, and hopefully we can do something about them.
Yep. Thank you. And regarding the fireworks situation, I can just speak on the county communication on that one. So the county and all of our departments have been pretty adamant about sharing information, especially come close to 4th of July and any holidays that weren't fireworks, to share information to people not to light up fireworks. Of course, they're illegal, but also I know for the 4th of July, the sheriff's department did have more people deployed overnight to give out $1,000 tickets for those who were lighting up fireworks and they caught. So I know that the county right now is making an effort to reduce the amount of fireworks that are happening in the area. And moving on to the Q&A, it looks like there is a question: is there more detailed reference to the breakdown of the $32,000 security fees? And I think this ties into some of the questions we've heard earlier.
Yeah, we can provide that. I'd be happy to show those invoices. Yeah, it's all public information.
Thank you. Okay. John, you should now be able to unmute yourself to ask your question.
Okay, just a comment on the fireworks. I was down on the 4th, and I'm right on the beach. And yeah, there were a lot of fireworks, but I saw the beach patrol or whoever was actively monitoring that. And of course, they can only, do what they can do. So I saw one group, lot of fireworks, and then a patrol came up and talked to them. But whether they gave them a ticket or not, I don't know. But I can, for Dana, I can just say that, yeah, there's active things going on. I don't know how effective that really is, but
Right,
there's not nothing.
absolutely. Well, thank you, John, for that.
So I wanted to get back to the cash flow.
Sure.
If we were to, you basically budgeted about $11,000 for security services, and it looks like that pretty much eats up any positive cash flow from the budget that you would have available to build reserves or whatever. And that, of course, doesn't speak to paying the past due or the invoices that are due. Is that correct?
Here, let me go to that slide again. So here's the 11,000 that's budgeted. And so I could move this to increase this capital replacement reserves to bring it up to about $26,000 and still pay off the outstanding invoices. But, it's up to the community when we present develop the budget and say, do we want to continue those services? How fast do we want to increase those reserves? And if we, the community will have the opportunity to present themselves and at the board meetings, and that's at the public hearing meeting around May, to protest with a written protest. But that's, and it's majority protest too.
Okay, thank you, B. I see there's a question in the Q&A from Dave. Would there be an option to have an electronic security with remote monitoring like Simply Safe?
Yeah, that was another something that we started looking into, and the county uses Bandit services, and I know that the city of Santa Cruz has used them too in areas that are with high vandalism, and we can look to see what their cost would come in at. To see, I know, like over our pump station next to our enhanced treatment system, we have a radio antenna there, and there's almost a dummy camera there. I think it's not functioning, but we can certainly look into to see what type of surveillance systems are available and what their cost would be.
We have another question. I guess I'm just confused how the invoice got so far from the budget. If that was a consistent service, how can we avoid something like this happening again in the future?
Do you want to talk on that, Carolyn?
Sure, yeah. So what had happened is the request for proposals was for, countywide. It was across all the departments for their services. So the package was reviewed by General Services and approved. And when we looked at it, we were looking at hourly rates for each of the different staff types. And so they were similar to previous rates, and we had the same scope. We had budgeted the same amount. And then we had a delay in receiving the invoices. The invoices were going to another department. And when we were able to review the invoices, they had this particular security company actually has invoices for the time from their facility to Place de Mer CSA2 for their route around the neighborhood and then back to their facility. And so, we had talked with them about that, and they cited that, that's based on the fact that there's so much more traffic, there's so much more in gas and things like that, that is how they charge. So unfortunately, that was not clear to our staff when they were reviewing this. And so, and coupled with the delay in receiving the invoices, we were not able to catch that sooner.
Thank you. Looks like we have a question from John. Give me 1 second, John. Okay, now you should be able to unmute yourself to ask your question.
Thank you. So I assume that you have some sort of a challenge against those invoices because they seem quite unreasonable. I mean, it comes down to $100 a day. And if you're just basically doing travel and whatever, you're probably getting charged, what, $30 or $40 an hour maybe for that?
Yeah, and we met with the owner of the company, and, you know, his position is, you know, these are services that were rendered at the end of the day, and that there, you know, we reviewed, you know, the contract language and things like that, and at the end of the day, you know, this was work that was performed, and so we're contractually obligated to pay that.
So I'm seeing there is a question about where they can access accounting for Place de Mer. I think this was already answered, be that somebody had asked that question and we can potentially make that available on the website.
Yeah, we could make that available. We've, in prior years, we've posted our cost management report for the CSA. So it would be, we could take them if maybe, I don't know, something direct on our CDI, Community Development website.
And I added the Place de Mer sanitation page on our CDI website, where that information will eventually be posted in the chat, so you can access that. John, you should now be able to ask your question.
Yeah, I feel like I'm the only one talking here. When we did the renovation of the sewage treatment, two observations. One is that there was a video monitoring service on the old one. It wasn't all that effective, but it was there and it was active, and you could at least see if there was something going on. I don't think you had enough resolution to identify like license plates or anything like that. But there was an electronic monitoring, I know. That's just a comment. Secondly, when we did the reassessment to fund the new treatment plant, I assume that projected expenses, maintenance expenses, were put in place to adjust all of that, because we had a choice of raising our property taxes. Some people chose a one-time payout, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm take it that the estimate of some of those operating expenses were underestimated, because you said something about permits and something about sampling and treatments. Is that a factor in why we are where we are?
Somewhat of a factor, with more maintenance being needed out there by our treatment plant operators. And you know, it was a new system, and our staff was somewhat familiar with it, with that system, but you know, I take into account what their needs are, and so I know that it was a difficult time during the pandemic and everything, and so another thing too that I do want to add is hiring treatment plant operators for the county has been very difficult, and we're having to hire operators in training just to get them trained up. They really require a lot of certificates to be able to work on our wastewater treatment plant. So it takes up to 1.5 employees to be able to maintain and these treatment systems. So there's more labor costs associated And we continue to try and minimize. I know that our chief treatment plant operator assigns, maybe up to 3 hours of maintenance time at the system, and they're shared between Trestle Beach, Canyon del Sol, Sand Dollar, and so there's various county systems that we maintain. But yeah, that's all a learning experience on our end as we take on new systems. So.
Okay, thank you, B. It looks like Dana has their hand up. You should now be able to unmute yourself to ask your question.
Okay, my question is two. The first one is I live in the park area, which of course is up on Holiday Drive, and they've recently come in and cut a pond in to a rather large expense. There was a lot of very expensive equipment out here working for a couple of weeks. And so there's the expense of this pond that was just put in that has no water in it, but it's there. And there's the expense of the field cutting, where somebody's supposed to be cutting the weeds out of this back field, which hasn't happened in over a year. So we've been having to do with that on our own expense, which you guys, the county, has been charging us for. So I don't feel that I'm getting a return on my money on that. And I'm curious as to who's paying for the pond.
So those were all drainage improvements in prior winter storms. We had some homes that did call in along Holiday Drive because they were experiencing flooding. So we realized that when part of that project, there was a lot of earth movement, and we didn't account for any regrading. And so we had to go back and create this, like you mentioned, a holding pond, and it's something gradual. So I'm pointing with my mouse here, but there's some drainage swales that were constructed. And so that all came out of the assessment. And that assessment has been closed out. The project is finalized. And also for the field that needs to be maintained, I just want to let you know that sometimes you'll see several staff out there, and we take that as an opportunity to train new employees on equipment. And we have an overhead number for the county for our department, and we charge that time, their labor hours to that overhead. It's training time. So, but we can certainly go out there. I'll find out from the operator how soon they can go out and trim all of those, the brush through that park area.
Thank you, B. Dana, did you also have a follow-up question to that? I see that your hand is still up. Dana, you have the ability. Okay.
Oh, yeah, no follow-up questions. I'm in good shape now. I understand. And I appreciate it. I didn't get an answer on the pond expense, though. Is that being rolled into the maintenance of the area? Or are we going to receive an additional line on our tax bill?
No, that was all included as part of the septic system improvements project. So we had maintained that project open. And I feel, yeah, so it was paid out of that. And the brush clearing, I'll point out in the budget where we charge time to it. We have here what we call the park maintenance area. So we didn't charge any time, and that's something I try and I'll review time cards and make sure that they're charging the correct number for the project to make sure that there's hours. But I know that like I mentioned, that we do go out there when the weeds get really tall, and yeah.
Thank you, B. So just to do a time check, we have 15 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? If so, feel free to use the Q&A function or the hand raising function. I'll give a couple of seconds before we end this meeting to see if any additional questions come in. Again, here are the contacts for Beatriz and Carolyn. Feel free to reach out to them. They have their phone, their email on there as a resource for all of you attendees attending this meeting. Looks like there are no questions coming in, so I just wanted to take the time to thank Beatriz for your presentation and Carolyn as well, and thank you to everybody who joined this public meeting. I hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you.